Let me tell you something strange about people who travel alone by choice. We live in a world that worships shared experiences, where every sunset needs a witness and every meal demands a photograph with friends. Maybe you're one of them, and maybe nobody ever explained why solitude on the road feels more like freedom than loneliness. If you want to understand what you feel without labels and have language to explain yourself without justifying, subscribe. Here we translate psychology into relief, not diagnosis. This isn't about running away from people. It's about running towards something the world forgot to value, the clarity that comes when you're the only voice in your own story. The world calls this isolation. Some see it as inability to connect, fear of intimacy, or even selfishness. But what if it's the opposite? What if choosing to travel alone is a silent form of self-awareness, a way of protecting your inner compass from the noise of consensus? These travelers possess something rare, the ability to be their own best company, to make decisions without negotiation, to change direction without explanation. They carry an internal compass that doesn't need validation from a travel companion to know which way points north. There's a particular kind of courage here that goes unnoticed. It takes strength to sit alone at a restaurant in a foreign city, to navigate confusion without someone to share the anxiety with, to celebrate small victories with only your own approval. This isn't about rejecting connection. It's about understanding that some kinds of freedom can only be experienced in solitude, that some versions of yourself only emerge when there's no audience to perform for. The solo traveler knows something essential. You can be lonely in a crowd, and you can be deeply connected while alone. We live in a culture that rewards the opposite, where experiences gain value through sharing, where we sounds warmer than I, and where traveling alone seems like settling for less. Social media amplified this pressure, turning every journey into a performance that demands witnesses. But maybe the real noise is exactly that, having to broadcast your existence to validate it, needing someone else's eyes to confirm what you're seeing is real. The pressure of co-creating every moment means constant negotiation. Where to eat becomes a democracy. When to leave requires consensus. What to see next demands compromise. For some people, this dilutes the experience rather than enriching it. They're not antisocial, they're protecting something precious, the ability to follow curiosity without explanation, to linger without guilt, to leave without disappointing anyone but themselves. In a world of constant connectivity, choosing to travel alone is almost revolutionary. Psychologists call this an internal locus of control, when your sense of worth comes from within rather than external validation. It's the capacity to generate your own meaning without needing someone else to confirm it matters. In other words, it's knowing how to exist without needing to be seen. Solo travelers develop this muscle more than most. Every decision reinforces their ability to trust themselves. Every solved problem builds confidence. Every moment of unexpected joy proves that happiness doesn't require an audience. This isn't about superiority or misanthropy. It's about understanding your own operating system. Some people recharge through social interaction. Others recharge through solitude. Some find meaning through shared interpretation. Others need silence to hear their own thoughts. Traveling alone isn't rejecting connection. It's choosing when and how that connection happens, rather than letting circumstance or obligation decide. It's emotional self-regulation dressed as a plane ticket. But of course, not all of this comes from peace. Sometimes it's fear wearing the mask of independence. Sometimes it's easier to avoid the vulnerability of traveling with someone than to risk disappointment or conflict. Sometimes solo travel is protection against being known too well, against someone witnessing the parts of yourself you're still negotiating with. And that's okay too, because even fear is a form of self-care. There's a shadow side to every strength. The person who travels alone by choice might also struggle with interdependence, with allowing others to influence their path, with the messy beauty of compromise. They might confuse self-sufficiency with invulnerability, independence with isolation. The same trait that brings freedom can sometimes build walls instead of boundaries. But acknowledging this doesn't invalidate the gift. It just makes it human. Some solo travelers are running toward something. Clarity, adventure, transformation, the version of themselves that only emerges far from familiar mirrors. Others are running from something. Expectations, disappointment, the exhaustion of being perceived by people who knew them before they knew themselves. Both are valid, both are brave in different ways. The difference matters less than the honesty with which you hold it. What matters is this: can you distinguish between solitude and loneliness, between independence and isolation, between choosing yourself and refusing others? The healthiest solo travelers know the difference. They travel alone, not because they can't connect, but because they've learned when connection serves them and when it dilutes them. They understand that saying yes to yourself sometimes means saying no to company, and that's not rejection, it's integrity. Even when the choice is born from wound rather than wisdom, there's something valuable in learning to be your own companion first. Avoiding crowds isn't isolation, it's sensory curation. Traveling without a companion isn't loneliness, it's intentional solitude. Choosing your own pace isn't selfishness, it's self-knowledge. When you travel alone, you're not missing out on shared memories. You're creating a different kind of memory, one where you're fully present to yourself, where every decision reflects your actual desires rather than negotiated compromises. There's something almost meditative about solo travel. The rhythm becomes yours entirely. Wake when your body wants to wake. Eat when hunger arrives, not when it's socially appropriate. Spend 3 hours in a museum if it feeds you, or skip the famous landmark if it doesn't call to you. No explaining, no apologizing, no managing someone else's experience while having your own. This isn't indulgence. It's congruence, the alignment between what you feel and what you do. The solo traveler learns to trust their intuition in ways constant company prevents. That quiet voice that says, turn left here, or stay one more day, or leave this place, it's not right, gets stronger when there's no other voice drowning it out. They become fluent in the language of their own desires, in the subtle signals their body and psyche send. This is psychological literacy, knowing how to read yourself. And perhaps most beautifully, traveling alone teaches you that you're enough. Not in the toxic self-sufficiency way that refuses all help, but in the quiet confidence that you can handle uncertainty, that you can create joy without an external generator, that your own company isn't a consolation prize, but a chosen gift. Every meal eaten alone without checking your phone. Every sunset watched without photographing it. Every moment of wonder experienced without immediately translating it into words for someone else. These become small acts of reclaiming your own experience as real and sufficient. There's a woman who spent years believing something was wrong with her because group vacations left her exhausted. She'd return needing a vacation from the vacation, drained from constant coordination and performance. Everyone said traveling together created memories, but she couldn't remember the places, only the effort of being perceived. When she finally took a solo trip, she expected loneliness. Instead, she found the first real rest she'd experienced in years. She discovered she could eat breakfast at dawn without waiting for someone to wake up, could spend hours photographing texture and light without someone asking if she was almost done, could change her plans midday based on a conversation with a local without needing to convince a travel partner. For the first time, the trip bent toward her natural rhythm instead of her bending toward the trip. This wasn't selfishness. It was the profound relief of not performing. Research shows that people with higher internal locus of control and comfort with solitude tend to have lower rates of anxiety and depression, better emotional regulation, and more stable self-esteem. But the most beautiful part isn't the theory. It's when someone finally gives themselves permission to travel the way they actually want to, and discovers that what they thought was a deficit was actually a different kind of wisdom. That needing less external stimulation isn't weakness, but a sophisticated nervous system. That their way of being in the world isn't wrong, just different. She learned something essential on that first solo journey. She wasn't antisocial, she was selectively social. She didn't hate people, she just loved solitude more than she'd been allowed to admit. And when she finally did travel with others after that, it was different. She chose it consciously rather than defaulting to it, brought her whole self rather than a diminished version, and could actually be present because she wasn't depleted from ignoring her own needs. The solo travel taught her how to travel with others. But first, it taught her how to travel with herself. It's not about closing yourself off, it's about choosing when to open. You can say, "I love connecting with people, I just need silence before and after." This is self-knowledge, not avoidance. You can explain that traveling alone doesn't mean you're incapable of intimacy. It means you understand the conditions under which you experience intimacy most authentically. Some people connect through constant proximity. You connect through chosen moments of intersection. There's a language for this that the world never taught us. You're not difficult, you're discerning. You're not cold, you're protecting your energy. You're not missing out, you're participating differently. When someone asks why you travel alone, you don't owe them a thesis on your psychology. But if you want to explain, try this. I travel alone because that's when I hear myself most clearly. It's not that I don't value company, I just value clarity more. Watch how that shifts the conversation from defense to declaration. The solo traveler develops a particular kind of emotional intelligence, the ability to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, between isolation and intentional space, between running away and running toward. They know that connection isn't measured in constant proximity, but in quality of presence. They understand that sometimes the most connected you can be with others is after you've reconnected with yourself. This isn't philosophy. It's practical wisdom earned through navigating foreign cities with only your own compass. And here's what matters. You can have both. Solo travel doesn't mean permanent isolation any more than partnership means never being alone. It means you've claimed the right to move through the world on your own terms sometimes, to let your journey be shaped by your curiosity rather than compromise. You can travel alone and still text friends about what you're seeing. You can eat dinner by yourself and still feel held by the people who love you from afar. The difference is you're choosing the terms of engagement rather than letting default expectations decide for you. That's not disconnection. That's autonomy with roots. Not every absence is emptiness. Sometimes it's the space where the soul remembers how to breathe. And maybe traveling alone isn't escape, but the journey back to yourself, to the version that existed before the world taught you to doubt your own company. Maybe it's not about leaving people behind, but about finding yourself first, so you can show up whole rather than fractured when you do choose to share the road. There's something sacred about being the only witness to your own transformation. No one else sees the exact moment the sunset hits differently because you're finally still enough to notice. No one else knows about the conversation with a stranger that shifted something in you, the wrong turn that became the best part of the day, the hour you spent crying in a hostel room because you finally felt something you'd been numbing for years. These moments don't need documentation or validation. They're yours, fully and completely. The solo traveler collects a different kind of souvenir, moments of pure presence, decisions made without consensus, proof that they can handle uncertainty and come out transformed rather than diminished. They return home slightly different, carrying a quiet confidence that can't be explained to people who weren't there. Not because the experiences were better, but because they were undiluted. Every joy was fully felt, every challenge was fully theirs, every triumph belonged to no one else. Which part of you did the world never understand, but in solitude you learned to respect? What if the need to travel alone isn't a flaw in your capacity for connection, but a feature of your particular way of being awake in the world? What if the richest companionship you'll ever experience starts with learning to be your own favorite travel partner, and everything else is just a beautiful addition rather than a necessary condition? If this video gave you words to understand what you've always felt, subscribe. Here we talk about what the world never knew how to name, but you always knew how to feel. We translate the psychology of being different into the poetry of being yourself. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is trust that your way of moving through the world, even when it looks like solitude, is actually a sophisticated form of self-love. The people who travel alone by choice aren't broken or afraid of intimacy, though sometimes fear lives there too. They're not superior to those who prefer company, just differently wired. They've discovered something the frantic pace of modern life tries to steal from us, that you can be completely alone and completely whole at the same time. That independence and connection aren't opposites, but different frequencies of the same human need. That sometimes the longest journey is the one from who the world expected you to be to who you actually are. Every solo trip is a conversation with yourself that would be interrupted by a companion, no matter how beloved. It's the questions you finally ask when there's no one to distract you from the answers. It's the version of yourself that emerges when there's no role to play, no expectations to meet, no one to be anything for. Some people find that terrifying. Solo travelers find it liberating. Both reactions are honest. Only one is yours. So maybe traveling alone isn't about destinations at all. Maybe it's about discovering that the person you've been looking for in every city, every country, every borrowed bed and foreign street was yourself all along. Not the self you perform for others, but the self that exists in the quiet moments between one breath and the next, in the space where no one is watching and you're finally, fully, undeniably real. That's not loneliness. That's coming home to yourself. And perhaps that's the only journey that truly matters, the one where you learn that your own company isn't the consolation prize, but the whole damn treasure. They say travel changes you, but solo travel does something different. It doesn't just show you the world, it shows you yourself against the backdrop of the world. Every choice becomes a mirror. Do you turn left or right when no one's opinion matters but your own? What do you actually want to eat when there's no compromise? How do you spend your time when there's no schedule but the one your soul keeps? These aren't small questions. They're the architecture of identity. The solo traveler learns to be comfortable with silence in ways that terrify others. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of completeness. The silence that holds space for thoughts to form without interruption, for intuition to speak without competition, for the self to emerge without performance. In a world that equates silence with emptiness, they've discovered it's actually fullness that's been waiting beneath the noise all along. They've learned that sometimes you have to subtract everything external to hear what's essential. There's a particular kind of confidence that comes from successfully navigating a foreign country alone, from solving problems without a committee, from celebrating small victories with only yourself as witness, from surviving moments of deep discomfort and emerging with new capabilities. This confidence is quiet, internal, unshakable. It doesn't need to announce itself because it's not performing for anyone. It's the difference between knowing you're capable and needing others to confirm it. And here's what they rarely tell you. Once you learn to travel alone, you can never unknow it. You can't unsee that you're sufficient, can't unhear your own voice now that you've finally learned its sound. You can still travel with others, can still love partnership and friendship and shared adventures, but you'll never again believe you need someone else to make an experience valid. You'll never again diminish yourself to avoid being alone, because you've tasted the particular freedom that comes from being your own constant and that changes everything. Not everyone will understand this, but you don't need them to. You only need yourself to know it's true. Here's the truth they don't put in travel brochures. The hardest part of solo travel isn't navigating foreign cities or eating meals alone. It's coming home. It's returning to a world that still doesn't quite understand why you'd choose solitude over company, why you'd rather sit with your thoughts than fill every silence with conversation, why you keep booking tickets for one instead of waiting for someone to join you. It's the subtle judgment in "you went alone," as if loneliness is contagious and your choice might infect their certainty. But you know something they don't. You know that some journeys can only be taken alone, not because no one else is invited, but because the destination is internal. You know that the relationship you've built with yourself through solo travel is the foundation every other relationship stands on. You know that choosing yourself isn't rejection of others, but the prerequisite for truly choosing them later. This knowledge sits quiet in your chest, doesn't need to defend itself, doesn't require their understanding to remain true. The solo traveler carries two passports, one for countries, one for states of consciousness. They've learned to cross borders within themselves, to explore territories of emotion and thought that constant company would never allow them to discover. They've made peace with the parts of themselves that only emerge in solitude. They've learned that transformation requires space, that becoming requires silence, that finding yourself demands losing everyone else's voices first. This isn't antisocial. It's the most pro-social thing you can do, becoming whole enough that your relationships are choices rather than needs. So when they ask why you travel alone, smile. Tell them or don't. Your reasons are yours to keep. But know this: every solo journey is a vote of confidence in yourself, a declaration that your experience is valid without witnesses, a quiet revolution against the idea that you're incomplete without company. You're not running from connection. You're running toward the kind of connection that can only happen when you've first connected with yourself. And that, despite what the world might say, is not loneliness. That's the opposite. That's finally, fully, beautifully coming home.